We are going to begin our panel now. I'm going to have, so Kristin Reynolds is going to be our moderator. She is a professor here at YSC. She works with sustainable agriculture, and I'll let her introduce herself and then give each of our panelists an opportunity to say a bit about themselves.
Thank you, Senna. Thanks to everyone for inviting me to moderate this panel, and to all the filmmakers and those in the film for your films. I really enjoyed watching them. My name is Kristin Reynolds, as Senna just mentioned. I'm a lecturer at YSE, and I teach a course called Social Justice in the Global Food System Capstone, where we work with community-based organizations to support their work through research. Outside of Yale, I'm also the chair of the Food Studies program at the New School in New York City. And so I am very excited to briefly introduce the panelists, and I understand you'll say a little bit more about your work. And I'm just going to go in the order in which I've been given the list here. So Guillermo Vargas Leighton is the co-founder of Café Monteverde, a coalition of 18 families in Costa Rica dedicated to growing ethically, sustainably produced coffee beans. So welcome, Guillermo. Bren Smith is the co-founder of Green Wave, a global network of regenerative ocean farmers, and a longtime ocean farmer himself. After realizing that his job as a commercial fisherman wouldn't have no future on what he calls a dead planet, he decided to switch to regenerative and sustainable ocean farm practices. Third, welcome, Bren. Nice to see you. Third, we have Fabio Natsumento. He's the co-director of the film Mata. Fabio is a documentary photographer and filmmaker who has worked for National Geographic, Greenpeace, Doctors Without Borders, the New York Times, and a variety of other venues, producing stories at the intersection between people, environment, and science. So welcome, Fabio. So I'll turn it over to each of you to maybe say, a minute or so more about your individual work. And I suppose we could just go in the order in which I started, passing it to Guillermo. If you'd like to say a few words about yourself, Guillermo. Oh, I think we've.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm Guillermo Vargas. I live in Monteverde, and northwest region of Costa Rica, about 12 to 1,400 meters above the sea level, and in a very rural, remote area, but dedicated much to tourism today. My role here at Café Monteverde is coordinating the education activities, programs, workshops, lectures, volunteer opportunities for locals and visitors. So I coordinate any effort oriented to provide more learning about sustainable farming using coffee as the core line of these programs.
Thank you. Welcome. I guess we'll pass it to Fabio.
I'm Fabio Naciman, and I work as a photographer and mostly as a documentary cinematographer and filmmaker, and producing stories that connect people and the environment, mostly passing through science. And I've been focusing a lot on indigenous populations issues in the Amazon, but also working about oceans and the poles, but mostly trying to shed light in stories that are misrepresented but need to be told. And that's the reason why I got to tell this story about these indigenous people and Mata, this documentary film. And thank you for having the film and me.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Bren.
Yeah, total honor to be here. I'm actually based here in New Haven, where Yale is, in the neighborhood of Fairhaven, which has been for generations an oyster farming sort of capital here on the East Coast. And funny enough, my Kendall Barbary, who's our programs director at Green Wave, is actually the the co-director of the film festival for 3 years, I think. So she sends her best. I've been farming the same patch of ocean right here in Branford, Connecticut for 20 years. Before that, I fished the globe and founded Green Wave. And Green Wave's role is really, it's a nonprofit. Its role is to train that next generation of ocean farmers and really figure out how to replicate and scale at the speed and at the scale we need for climate change. Our goal is 10,000 farmers in the next 10 years. And we're sort of hell-bent on doing it, but it's not easy.
Wonderful, thank you. And as we're all coming in from a distance and I'm not there, I assume that everybody's watched the films. And so now we're gonna have a discussion about them. And so we have a few questions that we've kind of curated for each person. And then I have kind of some general questions for everybody at the end. So I will just begin by asking Guillermo, we have a question for you, which is about kind of how you decided to become involved with this film. So first of all, maybe a little bit about what led you to begin Café Monteverde. And then when the director of It's Been Too Hot approached you about making the film, what was your response? Why did you feel it was important to get the message about the impact of climate change on coffee production into a film setting?
Yes, when we started Café Monteverde in 1989, our main goals were to continue the farming culture with the idea that no matter if you become a professional, but you have roots, skills, culture on farming, it is good to continue growing any kind of crop. So in 1989, we established the company working with coffee and dairy. 2005 or so, we decided to involve mostly in coffee. All the pastures were turned into coffee fields, in part because of the economic reason, but also because coffee, in the way we do, is more gentle to the environment than cows. So, and then we as members have long, deep roots in education, community organization. We have been part of local cooperatives, associations, many committees, conservation efforts. And then we decided in 2008 that we could dedicate also this farm for providing learning experiences about sustainable farming practices to local farmers, to ourselves, to our children, to local students coming from national universities and many students coming from abroad. We decided that since in Costa Rica we are blessed by nature, blessed by the history of our society, then we have the responsibility to do the best, not only to improve our lives, but to provide kind of models, examples, hope to people around the world who are also doing farming. So we decided that this farm could motivate people from all around the world about small-scale sustainable farming practices. As part of this process of more than 30 years, we also have been experiencing the challenges of the changes in the climate conditions. 35 years ago, the average temperature in Monteverde was 2 degrees lower. Today, it rains almost double. Today, we have almost 3 times the number of dry days a year. So we have experienced the climate change in only 3 decades here in Monteverde, and very clear for our coffee. So diseases that were not here came up the hill, now they are here. Pests that were not here, they are here. Even these days, we are preparing for eventually having to do some irrigation in coffee, something that we never have to do in Costa Rica. So in the moment that we are invited to participate in this documentary, for us is a new way of sharing this hope, sharing this experience with many people. We know today that video, photography, art in different ways attracts more the people than many words like I'm doing now.
It's the world we live in. Thank you very much. And, I agree with that. I think that, film, music, various forms of getting the information out to a broad public are so important in educating about environmental issues in the food system and, you know, across the globe, right? And I think that this film and your presence here is such a poignant example of this. I think I'm going to ask a similar question of each panelist and then come back around. So I'm going to turn to you, Bren. The Ocean Solution was one of the a few of the Patagonia films that was selected by the EFFY, if that's how you refer to it, the film festival that's this year. So could you tell us what it was like completing this documentary on your work, and what was the message that you were hoping to get across? You know, a little kind of tagging off of the similar question about, you know, why film and why documentary work?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, Darcy, who did the sort of did the soup to nuts filming all the way to producing had an incredible artist, incredible storyteller. And I think most important was that this wasn't sort of like kelp is the new superfood story, or this is about food as health and nutrition, or this isn't about climate change, is really about environmentalism and saving birds and bees and bears, right? Like, I think there was a real meeting of the minds between her and I in that this is about identity. It's about transition of cultures. It's about, you know, creating an army of blue collar sort of climate warriors that are bringing blue collar innovation and are going to create sort of a bar culture of shanties of climate change jobs, right? And I think there was a real meeting. I mean, you know, my history is one of feeling excluded from the environmental movement and then realizing, oh, no jobs on a dead planet, like this is a kitchen table issue. Being excluded, I couldn't care at all about what happens to my body in terms of health and nutrition. Like, McDonald's is my favorite place to eat, but I belong in the climate tent, in the climate solutions tent. And many of us do out there and we can see ourselves in it now because it's about building something sort of powerful and beautiful and new in our sectors, right? Take all these lessons. And I think it's really important. Darcy really understood and really brought her artistry to this idea that it's really important that everyday people can see themselves in the solutions. This isn't Google, Amazon. It's not just like, you know, Yale professors and things like that. It's an everybody thing. And it's a World War II sort of footing. And I think that's where the power is. And you know, like I know nothing about film, but Darcy seemed to have done a pretty good job.
I would agree. And being situated sometimes at Yale, of course, I have known about your work and have been very intrigued by the aspect of, you know, providing jobs and business opportunities for people who might not otherwise have access. So I think that's a really impressive part of the work that comes across in the film as well. Wonderful. So now I'm going to turn to a similar question for Fabio. So your film, Mata, documents an instance of the global phenomenon of land grabbing and, importantly, community resistance to it. Are there ways that, well, actually, I want to ask you a little bit more of a general question to begin with. The film then was selected for the panel because of its treatment of and portrayal of these complex issues: land grabbing, indigenous land rights, sustainable agriculture, environmental degradation. And the film really skillfully weaves this together, we think. And so could you tell us what led you to produce this film? You know, kind of a similar question: why film and why this one?
Yeah. So first, thank you for showing this film and inviting me to participate. And I've been working in this type of stories connecting people and environment a lot in the Amazon and a lot in the oceans. And I made this film with Ingrid Fatnes. And it started that she was working on a type of political education program in that region. And she invited me to join and just to see what's going on. And this place that is a pretty known place in Brazil, known for this, like the beauty of the coastline. And once I got there and saw what was happening in terms of the eucalyptus plantations, land use, and how these indigenous people, but also small scale farmers were struggling with this, it's a kind of David and Goliath struggle because of these paper industry, cellulose companies which are huge, which are enormous. And we saw that the issue was much bigger than we first thought and much more complex. And we first got there just to make a short video, pretty much just to help the local communities to have a kind of document to say what was going on. But once we saw the complexity of the issue, we started studying more and talking to more people. And I can say that we kind of made 3 different films in the process of understanding this story. And first, we interviewed about, I don't know, maybe 20 to 30 people to make this first documentary who was trying to kind of explain this story and the complexity between water usage, water contamination, land used, and the lack of land for agriculture to producing food, and the problem of classifying forests as a collection of trees and not necessarily as the complexity of biodiversity that in reality compose a forest. And this is one of the biggest issues behind these companies, which are not considered to make plantations, but they're considered to making forests, but they're just planting one single type of trees. So the problem is really, really large and complex. So we just said, so we need to make something more, something stronger to tell the story, because it's a known region. And of course, we need to address the problem to plastic. Of course, it's a huge issue, but paper, we do not pay enough attention to paper because of recycling. And as we believe that recycling is a solution in itself, we forget about what is behind the production of paper and the huge amount of land that is used just to produce celluloses. And if we think that we are in this digital world and we are not printing things as we used to do in the past, we might think that we are not using as much paper as we use, but we are using much more paper. And it's a lot because of packaging, because we don't think a lot about packaging. And if you buy anything on Amazon, if you buy an SD card, it's going to be packaged in like 3-4 types of packaging to get to your place, and we just toss it away. So recycling has kind of made us forget about what is behind. So we said to ourselves, let's tell this story. And instead of trying to explain the stories, we ended up in this third film, which is Mata, which is a much simpler structure. And it's pretty much this indigenous group, this indigenous person, who hopefully is going to be able to join us in this panel today, if he's able. And then this small scale farmer. And by telling the story of these people in depth, we can not only understand, but we can connect and feel what is behind these large issues. And again, this David and Goliath struggle.
Thank you. I know that when I was watching it, first of all, I thought, so what are these trees waving in the wind? It's so beautiful. And then you see that it's eucalyptus. And, you know, I have to admit that I didn't really know very much about the eucalyptus trade. And so I looked it up and you know, then you kind of start to make connections between the art and the way the art makes you be curious about the deeper issues.
It's a beautiful destruction, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yes. Well, thank you. And I hope that you're one of the folks that's going to be able to join us as well. So I'm going to pass back over to Guillermo for a second question to you. Fair trade, whether it's coffee or chocolate or bananas, other products, is of course seen by some people as an effective strategy to support small scale farmers, but it's also critiqued by some as not necessarily providing maximum benefits to farmers. So we were wondering if you could share any perspective you have on this debate and how Café Monteverde approaches fair trade, and whether climate change has changed that approach at all over the years. Oh, you're muted. You need to turn your microphone on.
In 1993, we became certified on fair trade as part of a larger coffee cooperative here in the region. And this larger cooperative, part of a corporation of fair trade coffee cooperatives in Costa Rica. At that moment, we were probably about 10,000 coffee growers with a fair trade certification during the 90s and early 20s. All of that time, we learn, support, value very much how fair trade, not only in terms of the social impact, but fair trade also with kind of balance of social and environmental criteria. How it not only tried to provide a better price to the coffee growers or any fair trade certified growers, but also try to help the small scale and mid scale farmers around the world, working as communities, as associations, as cooperatives, supporting gender issues, supporting the protection of the rights of the children, supporting the communication and strengthening the links between fair trade groups in different countries, helping the very local farmer to understand that he or she is not alone, that a similar situation is happening for another small farmers in Africa or South America. So I would say that fair trade for us is much more than fair price. It's much more than fair price. If we just try to compare the price of the fair trade certification with the price that we can get for example, Costa Rican coffee, good quality, or Café Monteverde, today we can get better price than fair trade by selling directly to in our case, let's say a roaster in Austin, Texas, who buys our coffee for 30 years, knows the coffee, visit the farm once a year, tells the story, take videos, pictures, bring his stuff to our farm. And so when they go back home, they tell the stories that they say, this is true. It's not just a label, or it's not just marketing efforts. So today, Café Monteverde, for the last almost 15 years, we don't have the fair trade certification, but we still get a much better price for our coffee. And that price is dependent very much on the history of our project. The people buying Café Monteverde, they pay more because they know what we do about the environment. How do we do with the coffee pickers coming from Nicaragua to help us, or how Café Monteverde links with the wider community in Monteverde. Yeah. Now, fair trade is one of the strategies to provide more benefits to small and medium-scale farmers around the world. It's not the only one. We still need to have governments that provide strong support to farmers. At the end, we need to be careful when we vote. We can have the best support from international NGOs. We need, and fair trade support, the idea of linking, connecting the final consumer and the producer. All that is great. We need to create this certification, but we need to elect people in our governments that really support small-scale farming, sustainable farming, local economy, circular economy, because at the end, policies, laws, norms are dictating what we can do as farmers in our countries. I think that fair trade has helped us to understand that we have global challenges, that we are not alone, that we get stronger when we connect with farmers in other regions. That's great, because more and more today, what we need is to understand that it's not just about me. It's not just about my family. I can do the best for my family, but if we don't work all together as a world united organizations, then we are all in the same boat. So in Café Monteverde strongly believes on acting local, doing something about, not just complaining. But at the same time, Café Monteverde believes on sharing the message, strengthening the links, supporting each other, going beyond the borders of the countries, going beyond the borders of your crop, because it's also very common that people only care about those who are doing the same like you do. And also something that is more and more difficult related to sustainability is that the fact that more and more food and crops are growing so distant from consumers. How do we supply those mega cities of millions and millions of people from the distance? We need to break those cities. We have to destroy many buildings and plant more food in the middle of the cities, because at the end, if we continue sending food from long distance, at the end we are also impacting the environment. So I mean, it's complex. We need to strengthen our local governments. We need to go deeper on training, education, alternatives. Today, our children are able to use internet much better than us. So we need to also involve the next generations in supporting this kind of initiatives.
Yes. I agree. And, you know, I'm often when I'm speaking with my own students, you know, thinking about the importance of community and understanding where, you know, it sounds trite, but where our food comes from. But I think that is an important part of, you know, you mentioned you're not feeling like you don't need the certification anymore because you have this reputation. And I think there's a lot of strength in that. And that, you know, there's this real tension and needs to be, I think, in this world between, you know, market-based solutions and policy change, which you brought up. And I think that's also very important. Thank you. So I'm going to now come over back to Bren. So you mentioned that you started regenerative ocean farming after you began to see the effects that climate change is having on cod stocks. So curious to know if you anticipate there being any challenges even for the work that you're doing now with regenerative ocean agriculture due to climate change, whether this is challenges in terms of the environment or productive capacity and or in terms of social equity or entrepreneurship. Oh, you're muted.
It's one of the things that keeps me up at night, you know, like those of us have just sort of figured out our footing in this new world. And then is climate change going to be changing that scenario at such a speed? Like, how do we stay ahead of the climate curve? So for example, my kelp, sugar kelp, what I grow, the main crops it's at its very southern end of its range. And we're already beginning to see like seed and source tissue coming back with poorer quality later in the season because of rising water temperatures. I mean, it's very likely that I'll be growing something else 10 years from now, but like we can't just grow anything. It has to be economically viable, right? This isn't gardening. This is, you have to actually make a living at it. Like scientists are excellent at gardening, finding new species, doing all this stuff, but like farming is a whole different kind of activity. So that, I think that's one piece. The other thing is there's a huge push in the natural solution space to just solve climate change, just draw down carbon and not lift up communities, like de-link justice from climate change. And I think that's a huge challenge, you know, so building, 50, 60,000 hectare kelp farms all off the coast of Africa, owned by, 3 guys at the top, right? And so that's just replicating the mistakes we've made in the fishery and in land-based agriculture, just moving it out to sea. And it just loses sort of all what's so fun and creative about this, and that it's a blank slate. We get to build something possibly beautiful and powerful and get between this mix of like big is necessary and small is beautiful. Like, can we do something that is replicable, scalable, but it's horizontal and not vertical? Like, can we redefine efficiency that brings in ideas of like family agency? Let's not have 1,000-acre farm, but let's have 100 10-acre farms, right? And maybe it's not as efficient under one set of math, but it's extremely efficient culturally in terms of inequality, in terms of justice, in terms of empowerment, things like that. And I think that de-linking is beginning to happen. And in my work, I'm seeing these two trajectories, right, of sort of corporatization and vertical integration, figuring out the unit economics in a very sort of climate denial business model, let's say. And then this other one, which is distributed sort of reef models, 25 to 50 farms, seafood hub, hatcheries, rings of entrepreneurs, and then replicated every place there's a Home Depot up and down the coast, right? That's sort of the other vision here. So I am concerned, like we've got a saying in Newfoundland that there was a moment in our history when they just started turning fish into money. Now we all want money, and there's no, like the idea is economic viability, but when you just turn fish into money, you destroyed culture. It became vertically integrated. It became like a traded commodity. And it was like people who knew nothing about fish on Wall Street trading this. And I really hope that kelp doesn't just turn into money, right? Because then we just lose. We have 8,000 people on our waiting list at Greenwave right now, just in the US for our farmer training program, 8,000. And the question is why? It's not because they all want to eat kelp. It's because they want to be part of a climate solution, but like own it, have agency, be part of this movement. And if you turn just kelp into money, I think you're going to lose that, the real possibility for mobilization that at least we're seeing in our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this like eco-modernist approach that we can just, make not necessarily ignore climate change, but there's always going to be just another kind of technological solution. It sounds, seems to step away from what you're trying to achieve, which integrates the environmental aspect of business. I mean, the way we talk about, sustainability as the three-legged stool, Julian Natsumento talks about sustainability is about like making sure that we're attending to the social aspects as well as the environmental and the economic. And I really hear that in what you're saying.
And I mean, I'd say just real quickly, like if we forget, it's like a bad strategic move. If we de-link inequality and justice from climate change, those of us that work for a living are going to say, so what, you like save the planet, but keep the economy, let it burn, right? That's the politics, right? That will drive folks like me to shutting down borders in between Canada and the US for, and if you want to get the policy right, you've got to get the politics and you've got to get the mobilization right of a solutions-based movement, a politics of yes, not a politics of no.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. So now I'll go back over to Fabio and ask the question I started asking a little earlier, which is kind of about land grabbing again. And so again, the film, as I see it, is looking at this, right? And resistance at the local community level to land grabbing, whether it's international or national. So my question is, are there ways that climate change has affected land grabbing or Indigenous land rights politics and resistance in Brazil? And I gather that the answer will be yes, but I'm interested in your perspective on it. And even if it's at the level of the specific communities that are featured in the film.
Yeah, if you think about the specific communities shown on this film, and if you think only about recent events and recent extreme events, later last year, it's a rainforest, right? So it rains, of course, but rain level has been decreasing over the years, especially over the last 10 to 20 years. But last year, huge storms had flooded lots of indigenous lands and other cities and communities in that area, affecting not only the Badashop people, but also Tupinambá and all the indigenous people, but also small farmers and etc. And by these, what I want to say is that if their lands, in terms of who belongs to these lands, if they had sufficient land, this problem would be less dramatic, even though they're still suffering with climate change, which is a much bigger issue out of local control. But the other way around, I think it's way more important to think that if you think that it's so, this specific region is where the first European colonizers arrived in Brazil and 500 years ago. And so these were the first contacted indigenous people in this part of the world that became Brazil. And if nowadays one of the huge struggles is to fight for indigenous land demarcation, which is being slowed down and pretty much like stopped in this present government. Not that the previous governments were doing great work, but it's getting much worse now, and Indigenous rights in general are being just chased. And so thinking about who owns the land, who has the rights to use these lands, and how it is in reality nowadays, they are just sticking with the small portions of lands. And if they had what they used to have 500 years ago, that would be much different than having like tiny pieces of lands. But mostly, I think that most important issue is that what Indigenous people are doing, not only in this region, but in the Amazon and in many different places in the globe, is that what they defend as a way of living is also proposing solutions that we need to listen to. And as Brand was saying, that we are just trying to keep the economy running, but we're not thinking in the long run, we're not thinking in sustainability, we're not thinking that we should be here for 500 years more, 1,000 years more. And the way that it's been doing, we are not getting there. And that's for sure. The question is not yes, no, but when it's going to happen and when it's going to be really bad for all of us, for our coffee productions or for our food productions in general, or for healthy. And what they've been proposing on keeping forests alive, keeping forests sustaining, is one of the main solutions that we need for climate change. And we should not only think about Indigenous people's right, but we need to listen to them. And if you think about what is being replaced in terms of forests, is being replaced by mining operations for minerals or animal farming. And if you think about all the consequences of these issues in terms of air pollution or water contamination with mercury, for us to have gold. So what they're proposing in terms of having free rivers, clean rivers, and standing forests is our main solutions for climate change. And by including them, not only paying attention and considering, but listening to them, we will make an important step towards our urgent solutions.
Well, and, one of the things you brought up about, without using the words like, traditional ecological knowledge and the deep knowledge that I can see in the film that the communities have of their local environment, I think need to not only be recognized, but as you're saying, listened to as, those are some of the solutions that we need to be seeking, right? And I think I appreciate that point very much.
Yeah, and if you think about land usage and land grabbing that you asked about, if you think of that specific part of the region, and if you think about who's benefiting from that land usage, who's really taking advantage of that, it's just a couple of companies, like 3 companies producing paper. And if you think about the number of people who could be truly benefiting from that, from their cultural aspects, for their food, for their health, for their education, and for their future. And in the end, it's just one species of tree, 3 companies, and that's it. And most of these issues, the problems, they happen just too far away from our eyes. And this is one of the reasons why we made this film and other films. And as Guillermo said, the importance of just having these tools, our tools, just shed light to untold stories, is because these problems, they're too distant. We all use paper. And as I showed this film, I realized that none of us have an idea of what is behind paper, right? Mm-hmm. And we are all using it all the time. It's about toilet paper again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As I began my comments by remarking, I didn't know, and I consider myself someone who pays pretty close attention to these types of issues globally. So thank you very much for your comments and your film. I feel like it's time for us to maybe take some audience questions. I do have a couple more questions for the panelists, but we're short on time. So it might be more interesting if there's any questions from the audience to begin.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for this, we are going to open it up to both the Q&A chat box on Zoom, and also we do have a live audience here. So if anyone wants to ask a question, feel free to come on right up to the podium and ask away.
Or put them in the chat. There's someone coming up. Okay. I can't see the room, so I don't know what's happening.
Hi. And I have a question for Fabio. I really enjoyed your film, and I thank you for being with us live. It's a treasure to have you, and also thanks to the other guests. My question is, I asked the question earlier because I didn't know, but my wife told me, but I'm going to ask it anyway so everybody else knows if they don't. What does mata mean?
Oh, thank you for watching, and I'm really happy that you liked it. And it's a great question. So it's a question. It's a word. Mata means forest, but also means to kill. So it's the same word that has two different means in Portuguese, in Brazilian Portuguese. So if you say that you mata someone, you kill someone, or you kill the forest, but it's also the same word for forest.
Thank you very much. And I really, truly appreciated seeing the indigenous perspective develop so fully, and to see them in wearing, you know, the native bird feathers and things, and their knowledge of the environment. That was a very important segment of the film. And I'm so glad that you spent so much time including that. Thank you.
Thank you. What's your name? Sorry.
Thank you. My name is Scott, and I live in Connecticut, USA.
All right. Scott, thanks a lot. And I think that I've been spending a lot of time with Indigenous people, and I think it is one of the, as I said earlier, I mean, we need to learn what they know already. And we kind of forgot a lot of this knowledge. We need to learn it back from them.
Awesome. Do we have anyone else that wants to ask any questions? Come on up.
Hi, yeah, and I'll echo the previous sentiment. I really enjoyed all three films. Thank you so much for making them and entering them. And I'm glad we got to see them today and that you're here with us. Fabio, one image from your film that stuck with me was the leader of the indigenous peoples was rooting through the soil with his fingers and looking for earthworms. And in the eucalyptus soil, the soil was dry, there were no worms, and that was the detail with which he could distinguish healthy soil from unhealthy soil. And one theme that I think has been running through all the films this weekend or at the festival so far is knowing details of the local environment is sort of proof or represents your connection to nature. Knowing what the grass needs or what the local plants need or why the environment is healthy. My question is for all of you generally, because you work, or Guillermo and Bren, you work with your environment, and Fabio, you've been spending a lot of time in that region. What does paying attention to the small details of the environment mean about or how does that improve human understanding of our connection with the natural world and how we need to take care of it?
Okay, should Bren?
Sorry, what'd you say? You want me to jump in?
No, I can just go ahead with that. So I think that like these, if we think about the dimension of these issues, if you think about the dimensions of these trees, plantations, and how huge is, I don't know, cattle farming in Brazil, and if you look at the numbers. So when I said in the beginning that we made 3 films, and the first film was a kind of an attempt to explain the issue. So we're using all of these huge numbers and these millions of hectares and etc. And in the end, it's numbers. It's hard for us as humans to really connect with it and the sense of feeling it and truly understanding. what is behind these huge numbers. And that's why me personally, but this film, and I think that lots of narratives tend to look into details, because details, they are super meaningful, and they are often forgotten in this world of statistics and in huge numbers. And Mate, if you think about this scene that you mentioned, which is Rodrigo Patachá just grabbing a seed and looking for worms, and you can see in the soil that is just biodiverse. You can see that's lots of different forms of life in there. You can see like forms of roots and seeds and worms and everything else, and things that we cannot see with our eyes, but they are there. And if you look at what the eucalyptus plantation soil look like, and it truly looks that, and because it is truly that. Like if you think about the amount of glyphosate they use to just avoid any other type of herbs, of any other type of plants to grow, because they are not good for the machines that they use to chop down trees. And how the opposite side of this land usage relates with the soil and relates with the plants. It's all about machinery, efficiency, and productivity. And these plantations, they serve for one single specific purpose, and anything else that is not this purpose is not desired and should be away, should be killed in the end. So if you think about animals are not interesting for them, or the plants are not interesting for them. So the idea is just like you kill everything and you keep only one thing that makes money, which is trees and celluloses for paper. The opposite side is how, in that same detail, these guys are interested on having multiple seeds, multiple insects, multiple forms of life. And if we look at one of the big issues of our times is an incredibly fast loss of biodiversity everywhere in the globe. And if we keep doing this at the rate that we are doing, we are not going much longer. And I think that in this small detail of that scene, I think that if we connect to that, if we feel that more than knowing the numbers, we might start thinking a little bit about solutions, about what really matters for us as a species. And if we want to still keep alive for many generations, and we need to think about it.
It's let's jump in and say, you know, one of the mistakes aquaculture made was it actually didn't ask the ocean what makes sense to grow. Like it grew around markets. So people want to eat salmon and tuna, so we grow salmon and tuna, right? So markets dictated what we were going to grow. And I used to work on the salmon farms. And instead, if you look at the ocean as unique agricultural space and you sort of ask it, what does it make sense to grow? It says, why don't you grow things that don't swim away and you don't have to feed, right? So there's zero input food that doesn't require any fresh water, no fertilizer, no feed. And that's sea vegetables and shellfish. It just completely changes the equation and actually makes it much easier to run a farm and a business, because my job isn't to pump the crops full of inputs, but rather just cultivate with sunlight and with the carbon in the water and the nitrogen, and which means my overhead is very low, right? So there's the romanticism for sure of like learning to grow with the sea, but actually the business model makes sense. Like anybody who's growing zero input food is going to move that food to the center of the plate as the climate economy drives up water prices, fertilizer prices, land prices. So if funny enough, the ocean is giving us the answers and the technologies that we need in order to address this. And I'm not like a romantic naturalist. It just made sense from a hard scrabble like New England fisherman's perspective to grow this weird stuff underwater.
The false dichotomy of environment versus economy is a false dichotomy. Guillermo, did you want to say anything real brief on this question about working with the land? We have just a couple of minutes left in the session.
Yes. As I say that videos, films, pictures, paints are helping very much to communicate. I also have to say that you don't understand the river if you don't enter the river. You don't understand global warming if you don't work many hours in the sun in your fields. You don't understand natural pest control if you don't go, like I did it many years ago, spraying a pest in our corn. And while I was ready to spray, I saw a wasp hunting the larva of the beetle I wanted to kill. If I have spray, I will have killed the wasp, not only the larva of the beetle. So life is much about really interacting with nature, with the environment. If we want people to love nature, let's people, since they are babies, give them the chance to enjoy nature. Don't talk about food. Help everybody to grow some food. Don't talk about polluted rivers. Take the children to clean rivers. I grew up in a healthy environment. My cells are claiming for a healthy environment because it was part of me, I was part of there. We need to take people out from the cities. These days I have here a 23 years old girl from Norway, an 18 years old girl from Hawaii, two 21 years old girls from England, one boy 28 years from Alaska. They are spending weeks here at the farm. This is what really will help them to understand how their daily actions impact the environment. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So we do have, sorry, excuse my email audience. We do have 3 more members of our audience here that are very enthusiastic to ask you some questions. I'm going to invite them up and then we will just give some closing remarks. But I wanted to welcome Bren and Guillermo. If either of you want to put maybe a website or a link for people to learn more about the organizations that you're involved with, Cafe Monteverde and Green Wave, I think that would be wonderful. I have the chat box open up so that the audience can read more. Thanks.
Senna, I wonder, maybe we could get all 3 questions and then the panelists can address them as they feel inspired.
Absolutely. I'll ask everyone to just come right up.
Hello, thank you so much for your films, and it's really educational. My name's Heidi, and my first question is for Fabio. I hear a lot about bamboo toilet paper being a better choice. Is there a reason we should be supporting bamboo? And is there anybody who's doing it right, who's not doing the monoculture, who's doing something more like the coffee farm we saw where there's bamboo and other things being grown together?
Yeah, thank you, Heidi, for your question. I think it's pretty interesting. I was recently asked about bamboo as a solution for paper and other things. And to be very honest, I didn't do a very deep research on the bamboo impacts and the different solutions behind it. But in general, if we have a diverse solution, it's better. And the problem is that we are focusing on one single type of solution for our needs. Paper is one of our needs, right? I mean, most of this usage is on toilet paper and packaging, for example. We need both of them, right? And the problem is that if we stick with one single type of plantation, that is only one single species, of course, that we are gonna have more problem. And if we have multiple solutions, we tend to have sort of like divide these problems and not focus in one single region or not focusing in one single solution. So bamboo can be a nice solution for many different things, even for clothing and etc., which is great. And especially if the plantations are not a monoculture. And if you think about biodiversity, if we avoid monoculture as much as we can, it's a great solution itself, even though I'm not exactly sure of what would it be if we have lots of bamboo plantations. And even sometimes we find a great solution, and as it sounds good, we sort of like direct all of our problems to these solutions, and then it ended up being the problem again in the future. And it's all about scale and how much we do and how diverse is our solutions structure. Bamboo can be a good one for sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Karthik. I really loved your films. I have a question for Fabio again, and it's basically asking you, after making the film or as you're making Mata, did you reduce the consumption of paper yourself in any ways? That's one question. And second question is to Guillermo. I was actually curious, and I wanted to understand if you are looking into any saving certain types of coffee beans or species that are more resilient in climate. Are you doing some research in trying to protect those native species? I understand that coffee plantations, in order to create coffee plantations, the rainforests were taken down, but I'm glad that you're trying to bring it back. But are you trying to also preserve some native species in doing so? So 2 questions.
So yeah, about my paper consumption, yes, for sure. And you cannot avoid thinking about it. And I think that as I work on different issues and this connection of how we use and how we benefit from nature, we just, even if you think about them for many years, and I started doing that maybe 15 years ago, and started learning one by one. And as you learn, every new subject becomes an important subject in your mind. And I was just having a very nice conversation before our panel here about fish. And I do not eat meat for a long time, but I was still considering sometimes having fish in some situations until about 5 years ago, or maybe more than that, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I started working in a project called the Outlaw Ocean with the journalist Ian Urbina. So we've been documenting these stories all over the globe and every continent and lots of different seas, and understanding not only the issues below the surface of the water, but especially like what is above the water level in work conditions and what is behind all those problems. That includes fishing. That starts with fishing. So it can go to a variety of problems, to like human trafficking or sea slavers. And then as you learn how big is this issue, you cannot avoid thinking about it. You will think about it, especially when you see and experience the consequences. And by seeing and experience the consequences of paper production, I do think about it all the time. I like a napkin seems like a crazy thing nowadays for me, because we don't really need a napkin, right? I mean, we can clean ourselves with other stuff. And yeah, I do think about paper all the time.
Well, I just wanted to add something to it, Fabio. Just mentioning, I mean, I've been coming to EFFY for a long time, almost since 2010. And every year I come, there's something new that inspires me to do something beyond. So just about 2-3 years ago, to stop consumption of paper, I just went to bidet. I know it's a personal hygiene thing, but that's an option available, that you could use bidet if you don't want to use paper. Just
yeah.
putting it out there.
Yeah, it's pretty common in Brazil. Yeah, and it's better for your health.
Yeah.
Thank
I think there
you.
was a second question, right? Maybe for Brent. Yeah.
there was a question to me, yes. So the question about saving seeds that are showing their adaptation to the conditions. Basically, I have to say that yes, it's something that not just as individual Café Monteverde project, but I've been part of the different organization of coffee growers in Costa Rica and exchanging learning research with coffee growers from Honduras, Guatemala, Colombia. Today, we are selecting those varieties that have better adaptation to the new diseases, new climate conditions. This requires some support from the Ministry of Agriculture and the Costa Rican Coffee Institute. But something we are focusing very much now is not just in looking for the varieties with the best adaptation. Our main focus at this moment is reconstructing the organic conditions of the soil. You can have the best coffee bush, the best plant, but if you have a poor soil, then you don't have the chance to help the plant to strengthen its immune system. So reconstructing the organic conditions of the soil is our priority at this moment. And of course, adding value to the final product, because at the end we have in some way to pay for the higher cost that it requires to do research and new more natural technologies for the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for answering.
I'll try to make it quick. Thank you for sharing. And Bren, I'm really excited to attend this and check out your farming hub. Definitely trying to bring some of that to our community on the West Coast, where we've been losing a lot of abalone population, both for consumption and ceremonies. So I will definitely sign up for that. And I just wanted to kind of uplift the importance of land defenders and ask Fabio if you have any networks that we can share, because I'm still feeling like these issues are being brought up and there's a lot of disregard for the loss of people in this community when we talk about Berta Cáceres and all of these other organizers across South America who are being assassinated by the corporations and the companies doing these things, often in tandem with the government. So it's a lofty question, but I would love to know any networks that we can support that are more grassroots from the community or raising awareness about these things.
Yeah, one thing that I can just briefly mention is it is at the same time that we desperately need to listen to these populations and the knowledge they have and the importance of having these leaders, not only for the future of these communities, but for the future of our species. And at the same time, there is a huge number of these leaders that are being threatened and that are being being forced to stop the fight. If you think about Berta, if you think about the number of voters, and if you think about the reality of what happens here or in Honduras and many other places, and if you think about the number of conservation activists that are being threatened and killed every year, in South America, it's a huge, huge problem, and it's increasing and it's getting way more dangerous. And if I can name something that you should follow and try to support as much as you can, is APIB, which is this Association of Indigenous People in Brazil. And I can share the link on the chat, and you should just follow them and see what's going on. And so in a couple of days, next Monday, I'm heading to Brasilia, the capital, where the indigenous people will be holding their annual protest, and this we don't know exactly how many people will be there, but it will be something about 3,000 to 7,000 indigenous people just to ask for their rights. And I'll be there filming part of a series of what we can call these conservation heroes, because they are truly heroes, and in the sense that they are fighting for the right thing, and they're putting their lives at risk for something that's not only for their own benefits. They are doing this for all of us. And that's why we're going to have so many, like thousands of people fighting for their rights in the Brazilian capital. And you should also follow that on the news and support as much as you can. There's a variety of ways of supporting it. And it can be only by talking to a friend who doesn't know about it. And there's a lot of ways of supporting. I'll share a link of the Indigenous People Association.
The name.
I think they're going to put it in the link in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Will you just repeat one more time the name of the association that you mentioned?
It's a PEEP. It's the articulation of Indigenous people in Brazil. I'm going to put the link right now in the chat.
Thank you.
PEEPofficial.org.
Wonderful. Okay, and I think we're going to wrap up there. Kristin, Fabio, Bren, and Guillermo, you are truly our superheroes of the environmental movement here. And we so thank you for taking the time to talk to us and for going a little bit over to answer all of our questions.
Thank you. A total honor. Thanks so much.
Thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.